Well, this report was leaked to the think tank Policy Exchange, and we've got here in the studio a senior fellow at the Policy Exchange, Andrew Gilligan. Thank you for joining us, Andrew. Can you just summarise for us the kind of main points in this report that civil servants have written for the government?
So it's talked about moving away from an ideology-based approach to extremism to a behaviour-based approach, and it lists this massive range, this huge constellation of behaviours, which it says are extremist. So misogyny, as you said, talking about two-tier policing, violence against women, as well as the traditional Islamism far-right threats. Now, none of this is to say that, like, violence against women is right or we shouldn't be doing something about it, but clearly it's not the same as extremism.
Yeah.
And the risk of this massive, great smorgasbord of things being defined as extremism is that the already very overstretched police counter-terror operations and the counter-extremism practitioners at local level, they just get completely swamped with new cases and they're even more likely to miss the really bad ones.
There's some other jaw-dropping things in there, Andrew, where it talks about the alleged grooming gangs. What? Have they not? Where have they been?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about this is the mentality it reveals in the Home Office of the people who wrote it. So they talk about, as I say, they talk about allegations of two-tier policing being an example of far-right extremism. That's clearly untrue. We know, I mean, we know that for a fact that there have been two-tier policing in this country. What was the grooming scandal if not two-tier policing?
Right.
The police would have behaved differently if the perpetrators had been white or the victims had been middle class.
And we've seen it with the demonstrations, the marches in pro-Gaza.
That's more contested, but nonetheless, there's undeniable examples of two-tier policing in this country. It cannot possibly be condemned as far right to say that. And then you've got, at one point it talks about the far right exploiting issues about the distribution of resources and asylum seeker quote-unquote hotels. But, they are in hotels. 35,000 asylum seekers the last time we had the figures were living in hotels.
Now, some of the problems that the report identifies are real threats, as you said, these growing number of particularly young men in their bedrooms getting addicted to extreme violence, perhaps carrying that out. But it's really important, isn't it, to separate that, which is crime, of course, and must be tackled, from terrorism, which is a very specific threat. What are the kind of features of terrorism that police or counter-terrorism units need to be so careful to focus on?
So terrorism and extremism, properly defined, i.e. not defined by this report, but properly defined, is an intentional threat to the security of the country or to the democratic institutions and values of the country. Yeah. So what a terrorist aims to do, the man who killed David Amess MP, for instance, he killed him because of his vote on Syria, an Islamist terrorist, and that is clearly an attempt to interfere with the democratic process in the country, to make MPs frightened that if they vote a particular way, they will be put to death. Yes. That's the difference between what that and, say, some other examples of violence, which are equally horrible, equally terrible for the people involved, traumatic for the country, but aren't extremism. So I think one of the key reasons this went so badly off track was Southport. And I think I mean, you see the Prime Minister trying to claim that Southport was somehow kind of terrorism or extremism. I don't agree with that. I think this is a guy who didn't have any particular ideology. We don't have any evidence that he did anyway. We may find more as the months and years go on, but at the moment we see not much evidence. He wasn't convicted on terrorist charges. He was convicted on ordinary criminal charges. And what we need actually is a mechanism to deal with people like that without having to brand them extremists.
Yes.
So, what went wrong in Southport wasn't a policy failing, it was an operational failing. This guy was plainly dangerous. He'd come to the attention of the authorities many times over the previous several years, but they did nothing. So what we need is a kind of non-extremism version of PREVENT.
Andrew, I'm really sorry we're going to have to go. An absolutely fascinating discussion.
This one, as they say in the trade, it's going to run and run.
It is.
A massive row about this report.
We'll be covering it again.